Hello, and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, where we cut through the hype and confusion of conventional marketing advice. I'm Paul Froge, and Mr. Marketing, Colin Jeffries, is out today. So I have this episode by myself, but I actually have an incredible guest for today's episode. We are joined today by Shama Hyder, the visionary founder and CEO of Zen Media, where she has worked with hundreds of brands across 6 continents. She's the author of 2 best-selling books and has been honored by both the White House and the United Nations as an exemplary young entrepreneur. She has delivered keynotes in over 20 countries and has received numerous awards, including the prestigious Technology Titan Emerging Company CEO Award. She was named one of the top 25 entrepreneurs under 25 by Business Week, one of the top 30 under 30 entrepreneurs in America by Inc. magazine, and to the Forbes 30 under 30 list. Her online videos were awarded the Hermes Gold Award for Educational Programming and Electronic Media, and most recently, she was given the Global Empowerment Award for Marketing and Technology by Anaki Media. And if this isn't enough, her home was featured on HGTV's Self-Made Mansions. She believes that to be successful, you must be a cross-pollinator. Welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, Shama Hyder. Shama, how are you today?
Hey, Paul. I'm doing great. Thank you for that bio. And I have to clarify, it's so funny. AGTV came to us a couple of years ago and they asked my husband and I to do this show, and it was called Self Made Mansions. And it's funny because I don't really post a ton about my personal life. And I do like it's not my shtick. I stick to what I feel like drives value. But it was interesting because the producers were like, hey, we're trying something new. We want to show people the pull yourself up by the bootstraps, the American dream. And so the show, like they were like, we're really emphasizing the self-made, right? So this is about like how did you and so my husband and I both like very much are the American dream. We're like the child, like the poster children for it. I came here as a kid from India, blue collar parents, and I'm so grateful to this country that has given me all this opportunity. And so for me, like everything I built with Zen Media and in everything, I was a scholarship kid, like all check all the boxes, right, of what that means to be an immigrant. And my husband was born and raised here, but single mom, raised in Portland, punk rocker, like dad was out of the picture, and mom worked in an day and age where not many women frankly worked, and she worked from home. And so it's just like we're both such we're such proponents of entrepreneurship and kind of being able to do the hard work. And so it was really a fun opportunity. If you ever like seen the episode, but and I feel like to the credit of the producers, they did a good job. They really did tell the story. And so the house became the secondary thing, which is fun. Like we live in Miami. It's a fun city. We love our home. And so, but that was, it was anyways, I just wanted to add a little bit of color to that.
Oh, that's great. I read a little bit about when you were a kid. I think when you were 9 years old, and your dad was an entrepreneur or talked in an entrepreneurial spirit. And I think I read something where you were whenever you went to a restaurant, he talked about the restaurant and how small businesses and taught you at
Yeah.
a young age. Share a little bit about that.
Yes, it's so funny. I mean, that's kind of what like with immigrants come here, right? They're like looking for opportunity. And so my dad is an entrepreneur, and my mom was too, and she just recently retired. And but we would go to a restaurant and he would try to calculate like how much they were making an hour and how much things cost and what was their cost of goods. And as a kid, it's very annoying.
Was that why you were sitting there eating lunch or dinner?
Anything, I
Okay.
mean, we would go on I don't wanna say vacation because we really didn't have the funds to vacation, right? But we would go somewhere on a like, get in the car and take a drive, and we would stop at, like, any sort of store or any sort of like mall or whatever. And immediately my parents would start looking and being like, "Oh, what could we open here? What would work well here?" I wonder how this laundromat is doing. I wonder.
That is so interesting. At such a young age. Fast forward for a minute. I know we started when you were 9 here, real quick, but tell me a little bit about your thesis in college about Twitter when it was in its infancy stages.
Yeah, Twitter did have 2,000 users when I did my thesis on it, and it was such early days, Paul, for social media. It's funny because I have a master's in organizational communication and technology from the University of Texas at Austin, and part of what I was finding in those days, like '08, '09, was that social media. I was looking at it from like an academic viewpoint, really, and I thought, man, this is really going to change the world, like how we communicate and how we this is it's never going to be the same. And so I think that I had that, both the enthusiasm and the naivete of whatever 19, 20 year old me looking at it. And I was really lucky. I had an amazing grad advisor named Dr. Donna Ballard at UT, who is one of the few women of color professors on campus, and she was just amazing. And when I said I wanted to do my thesis on Twitter and study this, rather than saying what in the world, she said, "Oh, that's great," encouraged me to follow my curiosity and passion. I did my thesis, and then when I finished and I graduated, I found that there weren't many jobs, because and not because there weren't jobs, but because the industry didn't exist. It was so early, right? Like, it just didn't people didn't know what to make of it. They were like, "It's a fad. I don't think this is going to be a right, like, this is for my kids, blah blah blah." And so that's really kind of the genesis of me starting Zen Media, which is, I was, again, that lovely naivete that you have when you are young and you're like, "Oh, sure." I feel like I have a problem that's called like, how hard can this be? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I look at something like, how hard could this be?
If somebody else is doing it, I can do it, right?
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah. So, again, a certain level of, I think, frankly, just arrogance that it takes, or like, just, I want to say naivete, because it just feels so like, sure, like, let's do this and let's have fun with it. And so, I hung out my own shingle when I was 21 years old and I knew nothing about business. I did feel like I had a good grasp on what was coming down the pipeline for marketing. So I think from an early age, and maybe it was all those early conversations with my parents and so forth, but being able to kind of spot those opportunities and say, I think there's something here, and then sort of dig there. And so, yeah, so that's the genesis of Zen Media and how we got started, and haven't looked back since.
That's great. At what point of your life did you think about? Was it in college with the whole thesis on social media that you wanted to explore those options, or was it before that?
So in high school, I was part of a magnet program that was it was called the Academy of Media Arts and Technology. So I was immersed in technology. I mean, I loved it. I was like, this is, I took to it like a duck to water. It made sense to me. And so in college, tech almost took a back seat. And, it's so funny because I think our higher education systems could use a lot of work, frankly speaking. But yeah, but no, by the time I finished college, right? So college was a lot more comms and business and sort of that education. And then when I graduated, I was like, I have all these passions. What do I do with it? And yeah, I mean, I think it was, it's funny because so much of your career, and I'd say this like broadly, I'd be curious to hear how yours worked out, Paul, is you look back, like it makes sense in retrospect. It just doesn't make sense when you're there doing, like you can only stitch it in hindsight, and you look back and you're like, ah, okay, now I can connect those dots.
Yeah, you don't have the crystal ball for the future. You think you know what you want, and you look back and you make mistakes, but you learn from them. You make some good moves, and it all culminates together to make you are who you are today, right?
Yeah, and one thing that I've always been grateful for is I always feel like I've had really good instincts. And the only time I've gotten in trouble in life is when I've overridden those instincts.
There you go.
Um, and so, and it's hard not to do because you're like, ah, logic. But no, and so that was instinctual, and seeing that and saying like, social media, I really felt like was going to change our ecosystem. But what I find really even more fascinating is how many like the parallels I see from the rise of social to now with AI. Because you hear the same things. It's like, oh no, AI is not going to affect my job. Oh no, AI is something to like roll our eyes at, and gosh, and my personal favorite, which is God, I hope I retire before I have to learn any of this. So yeah, I see a lot of parallels because I mean, I keynote so much on what the future holds, and how to use, because I'm not a technical AI expert, but I am very good at how do we use these tools to make sense of work, and how do we use it to be more productive, and how do we think about AI, in specific, like for this podcast, like AI in marketing. I know there's a lot of fear around it. I tell people, like, I don't think you're going to lose your job to AI. You're probably going to lose your job to someone who understands and uses AI.
I like that part of what you're saying because I try to ask from our clients all the way down to our employees, our team members. I actually last month did a presentation on digital marketing for the University of Cincinnati in one of their classes as well, and asking people that same question. It's interesting the viewpoint that you get from everybody. Like you talk about being naive. It's like I think some people are just focused on it's not going to affect my job. Some people are, hey, it's an opportunity to eliminate positions. Other people are saying, you need to really understand AI so that you can be the one to prompt AI to get the results that you want, right? So, being on that bleeding edge and staying up, and from our point of view and your point of view, being agency owners, it's one of those things to where if the client learns it first, you're out, right? So, you need to be one to educate your clients, make sure your team is ahead of the game, especially on the AI front.
Yeah, that's really well said, Paul. So here's what I see happening. I see the world in sort of two camps, and brands that fall in two camps, especially as it relates to marketing. You've got certain level of brands, put them in camp A, and they are just high on AI, right? They're like, fire everybody, AI can do this all. We can get AI to build links, we can do AI to write content. Like they are really excited about running teams without people, and just like AI is just they're so gung ho. And then you have the people on the other side, which are so scared that they are saying that they don't want their employees to touch AI, that they're like just like no, 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 we don't. There's like, I ask leaders all the time. This is always a fun one when I speak, and I say, how many of you've used ChatGPT, used AI? And almost every hand goes up in the room, right? Which is nice. And in these, you would expect that from leaders. And then I say, how many of you use it daily? And maybe like two or three hands remain. And so there's that distinction. So, but I think, the pendulum always swings and then it has to course correct. So I think both camps are wrong, because if you are looking at this and going, gosh, like let's fire everybody, these are the same people that are going to be scrambling to hire people back because they were like, oh, we overestimated, because AI is not a tastemaker. And so you need that more than ever. You need a point of view more than ever. I mean, we running Zen Media, we do PR for all these companies. We tell them like, what is the point of view? Like, let's spend time really sharpening that axe, because that's what's going to make sure that you hit harder, like we get more breakthrough. Because I mean, let's face it, we're about to be, you kind of see it a little bit, but we're about to get just inundated, right? So if we thought like, the last decade we had spam problems and spoof problems, we're now going to have slop problems. Slop problems meaning all this bad, and they don't even bad content as in like, it's not bad as in it's gibberish, because like to me, like that's slam, that's spam. I'm talking about just like AI that's regurgitating and using these words, and like I think we're so, but there's no point of view, right? It's just like content for the sake of it. And so I think what we're gonna see a lot of that, especially for these companies that are like, get rid of the humans, we can use AI. And it's going to suck
Yeah.
because there's gonna be, like it's amazing how many times people confuse competitors. And it's like that's how similar your stuff is. And I think so we're gonna see a lot more problems with that, right? In terms of like there's content, but a lot of words, no one's saying anything.
Well, it definitely needs that human element, human touch still, in my opinion, as well. Where you really need to understand the client's business and tone of voice, and really be able to, before the thought of AI back in the day, you'd have a piece of art or creative or copy that goes out the door, and that last person forgot to copy edit it, or the account
Yeah.
manager, and then it gets published. You know what I mean? So that's my fear with AI, is that people are relying on it so much that it's doing people's jobs for them, and before it goes out the door, I think some agencies are skipping that step. Some brands are skipping that step to make sure that there is that final stamp of approval, and being lackadaisical about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, quality control, of course, I think is a human, right now, definitely a human driven initiative. But even as AI gets better, it is a very good servant and a poor master. And so again, there's people who are like, we'll just, use AI to do all this stuff. And it's like it has some real limits in terms of, again, a perspective, because it's just it will it'll give you back what you feed it, right? And so and I think that's important. So yeah, so I think so who wins, right? So it's not the people who are, let's get rid of everything. Let's do AI. I wish it was that simple. I think that those are the same people that are going to have to say, smack. Like now I got to go back and fix this thing. And, we got rid of all our people or whatever. And now we need to fix this. And then, so that group's not going to succeed. And then you have this group that, is so AI scared and you're not integrating it, and you are going to lose workplace efficiencies. You're going to pay more. You're going to get like just so even so we're doing a lot of training for our teams about how to use it. And it's funny because we actually end up even training publications, because so many of them now have like the AI checkers. And these AI checkers are awful, Paul. Like it's so funny because we've had to teach, publications. I mean, you're talking really major publications who returned something and said, "Oh, this is AI written." And it's like, no, it's not. And so I'll tell you one funny story. So we had one, and I won't disclose the name of the publication, obviously, but I'll tell you, like, so we had this editor who we were working with, and the editor goes, "Oh, this is AI. We can't use it." And the team was like, "This is not, we wrote this. Like, this is not AI." Like, all right. So, they're like, "No, no, our AI is great. It's 99% accurate, whatnot." So we get on a live call with them and say, "Okay, your AI, your checker is so great." Yeah, it is. Okay. So we put something in and we show them, and it says 99% verified that it's copied through AI. This is AI. And they say, okay, look. Do you know what we put in?
What's that?
We put in the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, wow. That's what they feeded the AI tool instead of your copy that you sent
No, no,
over?
to show them, to demonstrate how poor the tool was,
Oh,
right?
I got you. I got you.
So because they were so convinced that what we were giving them was AI generated, and because part of it is if you use language that is above like a fourth grade fluency, if you use words like innovate or groundbreaking, any of these words that we use in our writing, like, these are not like AI domain specific, but it's just so funny because and so the team, internally in our Slacks are like, what do we do? Like, we're submitting this thing. They think it's not that I asterisk think it should really matter. By the way, it's very, we can talk about that because it's value, but it's just really funny. So then when we showed them and we were like, look, let's put something in and test it, right? And they're like, yes, AI. And it's like, no, this is the Declaration of it just this document from 1776. It thinks that it is you know, it's AI. So, I mean, these tools have major limitations, and I think everyone's sort of figuring out what those rules are and so forth. And so, my thought is AI is very, I mean, if you're in marketing, you should definitely be using it, right? Use it because from so many levels and layers. But one of my predictions for the next year is that, if you're not thinking about um, how you like, be search beyond Google. Because I think we saw this year, right? Already. Like people are searching on social, they're searching on Instagram, they're searching TikTok. Google's not like their entry point anymore to this vast library. It's often just like the gateway to get to the website or whatever they're already looking for. And now you add AI to it. So it's like, how are you going to show up in Chat GPT? How are you going to show up? And what happens in when another year agents talk to agents? So my agent talks to your agent and your agent talks.
Yeah,
Like, we're not
absolutely.
that far from that, Paul, that my AI avatar could get on this podcast with you and Colin because it knows how I think and it knows what I would say. And, and your avatar gets on because you know the questions. And so we're not that far from that kind of agent to agent interface.
That's crazy. I see what you're saying as far as that prediction, though, and the whole AI, optimization versus SEO, and we were just looking at some Google Analytics this morning, and the actual number of, I think it was 60% of traffic that's coming into Google searching is not actually even clicking on anything. They're getting what they actually want. So it's going to be interesting how that transitions over to voice search and to AI search as well.
Yeah, and Google's really shot themselves in the foot with that too, haven't they? And it's like, and they've hurt all the websites. Like, you have all these things, and now you have Google Flights, new tool. You don't even have to leave. Here you go, right? Weather, you used to click on sites. No, we'll just give you. So we've also trained people like to do that, and so, but that does make it. So here's what I think is really interesting. I think legacy brands will carry so much more clout. Like, I think we'll see a lot more fight for people wanting to even buy old brands just for the name value because breaking through the noise is going to get so much more challenging. So it's like, what does that look like, right? In an era where yeah, there is so much noise. And so like when we talk about brand building, it's like the best time to build your brand was 20 years ago, man. And the next best was 10 years ago. And so it's just, but I just feel like even in marketing circles, you have these like little conversations, circular conversations about like attribution and how do people, and I'm just like, you were so missing the bigger picture, right? Like anyways, it's just missing. I feel like a lot of times our industry misses the forest for the trees.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. One of the things I read about that you believe in is focusing on the meaningful and not just the measurable. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, this is yes, I mean, so what I always say is, you want to choose the meaningful, not just the merely measurable. So it's not to say that meaning can be measured, but it may not be on your yardstick. I mean, Paul, you just said it like 60% of people searching Google, they're not even clicking anything. They're not even going to the website. They're just getting what they need and leaving. And then you think about dark social, which is this idea that we consume publicly and we share privately. How many people are going to listen to this podcast? How many thousands of people are going to listen to this? How many of those people are going to leave you a comment, Paul? And say, Colin, Paul, I love your stuff. Like, this is great. Like, you don't do that. How much do you consume in a day where you go leaving comments? Like, because so I think one thing that is so underrated and does not get talked about enough is the novelty of the internet is gone. Like this idea where we loved giving out our email address and we loved commenting and liking. When I remember when Facebook first came out and there was a page that was like people would just pop up pages, and this page was something like men without ties but jackets look sexy. And it had like over 1 million likes. Right? And so pretty sure I was one of those likes in college. But it's just so funny because you just think about like how excited we were at early days of internet, and it's like, ooh, ooh, raise my hand, and it was this like little playground. And today it doesn't work that way, right? How many people look at their inbox and go, gosh, another full day of checking email? We don't have that. And so I think as marketers, we have to really recognize and educate even our C suites and our clients to say, people are consuming publicly, but they're sharing privately. It's in Instagram DMs. I mean, so much happens in DMs, right? That is the future of marketing. The future of marketing is in private messaging. That's where it lives. And so if you say, how do I impact that? Great question. You impact that by understanding that consumption is engagement. If you say, how do I measure that? Right? You measure that way more qualitatively than quantitatively because you don't get to peek in people's text messages and like we've never had that. So it's funny because I think the last 20 years have deluded us into thinking that everything is measurable and have deluded us into thinking that, because it was in Google's favor. It's in the favor of these companies that are trillion-dollar businesses to be like, look, they have preyed on a fear of marketers and entrepreneurs that say, like, that old quote that, by the way, isn't even the right quote that says, half my advertising is, effective. I just don't know which half or whatever it is.
Steve Wanamaker, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not, that's not even the specific, right? There's so much nuance around it, but there was this inherent fear that people felt like they were losing money in advertising and marketing. So here come along these companies that say, but not anymore. We can tell you, we can give you this data. And so it became this cool thing to be data driven. But what in the actual, like, 4-letter word that I don't let my
Yeah.
toddler, like, what? And why? Like, so we all became this deluded and comfortable with, like, let's measure the clicks, let's measure all this stuff. And so now, of course, you have people who, like, what happens when you're not clicking? What happens when you're sharing privately? And so we actually go back to the way marketing and advertising has been done for eons, right? Like, how did you measure before the internet? And so I think again, the last 20 years have been an aberration and the outlier in marketing, not everything that came before it. And now we're actually correcting to the way things were. And that's not to say we shouldn't use what we have to help guide our decisions, but it should be seen as more of a recommendation, more of a best practices rather than this like very strict ruler, very because you're going to make bad calls because there's no way for you to have that data. And I think that's the part that no one in our industry is saying out loud. I don't think anybody wants to say, like, you can't measure that, not in the way that you want to.
That's a great point. Great
You
point.
know,
Yeah.
I'll say it. But I think that's true. And what's happened is marketers have been so scared of losing a seat at the table or really wanting a seat at the table that we have contorted ourselves to fit this little box that isn't even our box. We've said, "Oh, you want more data? Okay, I can get it for you. Oh, you'll only give me budget if I show you, how many leads, aka email addresses I can get. Okay, here's all the like, we if you want to look at how to fix marketing, you don't have to look further than where are the incentives. And what you incentivize gets measured, gets promoted. That's the culture that you create. And so I think that's what I mean by if you choose the merely measurable over the meaningful, your brand will suffer. Right? That's just the short and long of it. But I just feel like because marketers for so long, and again, helped bolstered by social and search engine saying, we'll give you the data that you need to get a seat at the table. We're like, all right, we go running. We're like, I want a seat at the table. Sure, CFO, you want this? I'll tell you how this affects us this quarter. But what if that's not even feasible or possible or a good idea? And so now what we're seeing is like, I think marketers have to take back and say, you know what? I understand your rules. Those are not the rules that apply to this industry, and science does this well. Like, biologists don't take the rules of physics and apply it to biology. They're like, a cell disintegrates at the rate that it disintegrates at. Like, I understand, like, so it's just really funny to me that I think as marketers, we've gotten so excited and really wanted to say, like, no, we are valuable and yes, we can quantify our very existence. But what if it's not certain things are not meant to be quantifiably measured. Can you measure a mother's love? Can you measure how you feel about your children? I can't quantify that. I don't know any parent that can. And so there are certain things that we accept as truth and that we know that work. And I'm not saying blindly, like if you talk to your customers, if you talk to people who are seeing your content, they will tell you this. But we don't, it's almost like we have an aversion to that qualitative because the last 20 years trained us by these big platforms that were making crazy money. So the ad tech industry, the martech industry, all these folks to say, no, 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 no. You the numbers are what help you keep you safe, and we will give you those numbers, even if those numbers are complete horseshit.
Yes, yes, I agree. And you go back 20 years ago, and before everybody was competing for results and Google Analytics and everything else to say, hey, I'm a better agency or I can build your brand better. Everything went right to this direct results advertising, right? It almost reminds me of back in the day of, the home shopping network where, you do an hour of selling toasters on TV, and see how many we can sell. It's like, how do we change that thought process with business leaders and C-level in organizations to where they would actually listen to going back the opposite way about building brands versus how many widgets they sold in the last week?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. And I feel like, podcasts like this help, right? But one of the things that I know you're going to ask me this later, but I'll answer it now. It was like, what is the thing you're rethinking, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm rethinking is I'm realizing that, we do all this education at the marketing level, but we kind of preach to the choir. Like everyone listening to this is probably nodding around because they know this truth in their gut, in their heart of hearts. They know what we're saying is true. But where we need that education is the CEOs, the board, the CFOs. I mean, so much of my day, I feel like I just want to respond with the gif of Mark Zuckerberg where he tells senators like, "We sell ads, senator," because that's how it feels like that, right? It's like I'm explaining these things, and so I do think education is important, and I mean, 16 years of doing this, I feel like people either want to understand and they get it or they don't, and so my advice often to younger marketers is go to a company that does. And if more marketers just say, you know what, we're not going to work for people who don't get it and they don't spend so much time banging their head against a brick wall, the industry has to follow. Like eventually companies will be like, if we want good talent, we're going to have to start understanding how marketing works truly for this day and age. Because if we don't have any like let our stock price tumble, right? Let's see when competitors are stealing market share. But I think marketers for too long have come from a place of fear. There's no judgment there. I understand we all have to put food on the table, and but I think we've given up too much of our power. And I think if marketers take a stronger stance and say, this is how things, you don't, it's funny because you go to a hospital and your doctor says you need surgery or whatever. You might get a second opinion, but if all the doctors like you need surgery, then you're like, all right, I need surgery, or I need whatever. You accept that from people who you feel like know what the F they're doing, right? But I think because marketers are again so eager, I mean, we have this like people pleasing, which is what's funny because it's what makes you good at the job, right? Like you're like, I understand customers, you have empathy, you care, you want to help people. Like I don't know many marketers that are in it just because of the money and the glory. Like most marketers I know genuinely want to feel like they're helping people and making a difference in the world. And, they're moving the needle in some way. So I think it takes a cohesive effort. I think you educate where you can. And I think you also know when to walk away because there's just certain organizations and leadership and they're not going to get it. And you're like, do you really want to spend your career doing that when you could be doing your career somewhere else that gets it, building your resume, doing the right things?
You said it well. That was great. I'm glad we covered that now in this conversation, and that because that's important. I really believe that, and it's the education piece of it, and continuing to preach, and talk about really the future of marketing. Let's get out of this whole commoditized world of everybody can deliver the same thing, and we're all buying the same ads, and bidding on the same things. Let's talk a little bit more and back ourselves up to really what brands were built on. Like you said before, you wish you could buy a brand that's 20 years old, at this point versus, from 20 years ago, I guess is what you were
Mhm.
saying, versus everything that's going on right now. One of the things you talk about is curation versus creation. And would like to hear about curated content, and everything seems to be focused on you got to just create and continue to build the asset library. What are your thoughts on that, Shema?
Yeah, Paul. So curation is one of the five principles I talk about in my book, Momentum. And it's funny because that book came out a couple of years ago, and every day I'm like, that's a principle. That's a principle. That makes me feel good. I'm like, okay, good. That book is still valid and useful, and people can get, apply these concepts. So, for a while I've said this. This was pre-AI. You can create content, you can create IP, and I think that's great. But as IP increases, again, you need those tastemakers, you need curation, which is not unlike this podcast. Because, Paul, you and Colin could sit here and do every episode and talk about your experiences and your wounds and stuff from the trenches and like stuff you're seeing. And you've chosen to say, can we invite people where we can have these conversations? So you are curating, right? Every podcast that does interviews, that's it's curation. It's There are so many noisy things out there. And I think this is what's given rise to influencers. It's like, who do I trust? Where do I go? Because I know there's all this stuff out there. Who is going to give me the unbiased, unfiltered truth? And so I think people get hungry for that. I think people get hungry um, so for that curation. And so I think for brands to think about and marketers to think about, you don't always have to keep creating. Can you curate? Can you get smarter? I just shot this video yesterday and I was talking about people say, what if you don't have a great budget next year going in, not the budget that you need to do something? And my hack for that is to say, if you don't have the budget, change the timeline. So let's say you have like 50K for the year and you're like, there's no way I can make any difference in, 4K a month, whatever, and change every month. And it's not going to move the needle for what we need to do. Like, what's the point? And so my thought is take that and do something in the first quarter. So don't use that money throughout the year, but do the campaign in the first quarter and then use that and sprinkle that throughout the year, right? Where you can continue because you're just going to get so much more benefit out of condensing that into a specific campaign and time period versus trying to drag it out. So these are just things to think about. And yeah, I think about them a lot.
So you talk about momentum, the book that you wrote, and then you also have the Zen of social media marketing. Is that right?
Yeah, Zen of Social
Yeah.
Media Marketing was my first book, and it was the first book on the topic. And so, one of the first practical, like, here's what you need to do, because it didn't exist. People kept asking me, what do I need to do? I was like, heck if I, like gosh. And so then it's funny because when I wrote that book, I wrote the last chapter first, which was burning Q&A. It was all these questions that I was getting. I was like, here's all the answers. And it followed. So it went up to 4 editions. It's been translated into multiple languages. And I still think it's a really good primer for someone that's like, all right, we need to like get back to the basics.
Oh, that's great. It's interesting whenever you put something in print like that that's evolving so quickly. You mentioned 4 editions on that. How do you keep up with that? How do you keep up with the trends and coming up with the new edition that you're going to add?
Yeah, so I don't know if Zen's gonna get a new edition because things are just changing so fast. And I even think about like writing a book on AI, right? And I'm like, how do you write a book that's gonna change so quickly? And so no, Zen had a great run. We 10 years, we kept it updated. And like you said, it's still really valid because of the framework in it, right? So the platforms come and go, but like how to think about it, how to think about attracting conversion, using that to transform and telling those stories and all of that. So it's still a valid and good book again, which makes me happy. Yeah, I mean things change so fast. One thing that really helps me, Paul, is I'm in the trenches. I hear from clients every day. I talk to leaders. I'm out there, and I don't think there's a substitute for that. So I think if CEOs, and I say CEOs even more than CMOs, but like if you can get your CEO, and this is might be a good way to be like, how do you convince leadership? Have them do a field trip, shadow one of your customers all day over their shoulder. What are they doing? How are they, like how are they getting their news? What are they? And it might shock you, and it's just funny to me because sometimes I have marketers that I talk to and they'll say, oh, we did this white paper and our leadership is concerned because people have not left comments on the white paper. And I'm like, people have not left comments on your white paper about cybersecurity for the healthcare industry? Really? I'm shocked. Shocked. Right? But it's like, but then when I ask them, like, when was the last time you left a comment on a white paper? And they're like, oh yeah, no, why would I do that? It's like, yeah, that's so I think part
Oh,
of it is that
that's a good point.
we misplace it. I mean, I feel like the moment we put on our marketer hat or business hat, we take off our common sense, I'm also a human being hat. And that's why when I ask, so much of my job is to ask these questions that just get people to think about things differently. And when they do, they kind of, we all chuckle at ourselves and you're like, oh, yeah, that's, because we live in like the age of Amazon and AI. And, you live like, I've asked people in my keynotes, and I said, how many of you literally sigh out loud when Amazon says your package will be delivered 2 days or next day and not the day of. And people laugh because it's true, because you're like, that's what we've trained ourselves, right? To have this kind of instant gratification, this instant. And so then you have to sort of rise even in customer experience to kind of meet that. I think the good news is AI might finally be the thing that helps us bridge that gap. And it'll probably be here sooner than we think. So again, I think being able to be realistic. I'm like, again, part of me is I'm in the trenches every single day. I talk to so many industries. I talk to, and I mean, Paul, you run an agency. You get what that's like. I think one of the wonderful things about working with an agency, despite all the, I feel like the punching down people do on agencies and so forth, is that we get to see such a variety of things you don't. Like as a client, like you're in deep in your vertical, you think your thing is the world, where I can look outside and be like, this is where you fall on the barometer. Here's something that's working really well, how can we apply it? So I think it's like those sorts of things make a big difference.
That's well said. So we're coming up on time right now. I do have one last question.
Ask away.
We already covered what you're rethinking, which is good. So the last question I have is you've got such a busy life with being the CEO of Zen Media, authoring books, thought leadership, working with clients, and I know that there's not this silver bullet into how to organize and live life to the fullest and all of that. But give our listeners some thoughts on how you organize, your different buckets, and obviously your personal life too. You mentioned, your personal life, and what do you do, Shema, to balance it all?
Uh, so I think what I have always been grateful for is I'm not a perfectionist, which I think is very helpful. I'm an editor. So rather than trying to aim for perfection, I get really clear on my priorities. And I'm also a mom, Paul. I've got two little kids. I have a 5-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. I'm married to a very understanding, amazing guy who is also an entrepreneur and has a business. And so, like, it's funny, we're doing to our kids what my parents did to me, which is, my kids like know the words, like the letters KPI, which I think they learned before ABC. And like, like it's so funny. I think my son was like 3 years old when he told my mom when she was visiting, he said, we're going to have a meeting and a dinner meeting because I was and so he told me, he said, I'm going to have a dinner meeting with nanima, which is what we call grandma in Hindi. And I said, oh, okay. So it was so funny, and he was so serious about it. And I said, well, Archie, every meeting needs an agenda. And he said, what's agenda? And I said, it's what are you going to do? What are you going to do at the meeting? You need to have you need to be clear about what you're trying to accomplish. And he looks very thoughtful, as 3-year-olds can look pensive. And so he says, we're going to eat steak and chocolate cake. And I was like, that's fair. And so I think part of it is, I infuse my personal life with business. I take my kids with me to meetings. They get to be part of conversations. They kind of like, which I think is great, right? Whether they find that annoying now or not, I think they'll. I was always amazed at when I understood like how credit works, and I had so many friends who didn't. They were like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Had your parents didn't talk about this stuff?" And so for me, it's very much a fusion of things. And then look, there are days where I'm like a great mom, and I feel really good about my parenting and I feel like I spent time. And there are days where I am a really good CEO. And it's rare that both of those days are the same day. Sometimes it's a miracle, but usually you just have to choose, right? So I try to be very intentional. I think ever since having kids, I've become even more of like, I'm very protective of my time. I don't speak as much as I used to. I say yes to fewer things. I'm very clear about like I'll speak to audiences if I've spoken to them before. If I'm like I really feel like I can make a difference for this audience, and so I'm pickier about where I keynote and what I say yes to and the projects that I take on. And let me just say, I know how privileged that is, and I'm so grateful that I worked my ass off in my 20s to be able to have that now.
There you go. Nice. I
I
love it.
I feel like people don't talk about that enough. I'll kind of end on this for you. I just judged this competition for PR Web. We're looking at entries and so forth. And one of the questions on the entry was, for I think it was for like this was for an individual award, and it said like, what do you do outside of work? And my feedback was, I think this is a terrible question because the reason I'm a judge here and you invited me is because I didn't do anything except work for the like I didn't how do you think that works? And so I do that. I was like, maybe we rephrase this question in the future. And that was my feedback too. Is maybe there's more about how does what's happening in your personal world color your philosophy at work? Because it's also a privileged question. If you think about how many single moms there are that are like, what do you mean outside of work? I take care of my kids. Or like I take care of, an elderly parent or a grandparent. Like that's what I do. And so yeah, I feel like the last decade there's been a lot of punching down on work, and it's somehow cool to do that. And I wasn't raised like that, and so for me, like work is very sacred. My husband and I both believe that, and so one of our family values is that work is important and it's sacred, and so we treat it as such. We take a lot of pride in what puts food on the table. And my kids, I hope they get that value, and so anyway, sort of a long answer to your question, but yeah, priorities and being really clear on your values, and then just protecting your time, saying yes to the things that feel like really are going to make a difference.
I think that's super important for sure. Well, Shema, it's been great talking to you. We covered a lot today with AI. We talked a little bit about measurability versus meaningfulness. We talked about curation and creation, and talked about your personal life and your experience and running an agency, being an author, thought leader. So really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Paul. Glad to be here.
So until the next episode, keep rethinking those common assumptions. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.